Networking and marketing made simple is for you, the business owner that has a product, service, or message that you truly believe in. My name is Scott Aaron, and each week we'll take a behind the scenes look at real world networking and marketing tactics while leveraging LinkedIn to get what you have in front of many more people. Thanks for spending time with me, and let's get started. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Networking and Marketing Made Simple. Super excited for today's episode for a number of reasons. Number one, I have another interview coming at you guys. But number two, we're actually talking about one of my favorite topics, and it's obviously one of the themes of this podcast, which is networking. I actually have one of the most highly regarded networking experts. He's actually the author of Networking Unleashed, amongst many other things that we're going to discuss today. So I don't want to spoil that for anyone that's watching or listening. So with that being said, Michael Forman, welcome to today's episode.
Thank you, Scott. Good to be here.
So before we dive into everything that you're doing now, I always like to start out the episodes by rewinding the tape before we go forward. So if you could personally rewind the tape on your professional journey and press stop at a moment that you feel or felt at the time was a pivotal moment for you or a catalytic moment for you that kind of propelled you into everything that you're doing today, what was that moment for you?
Okay. Well, going back a ways, I'm a veteran of Desert Storm. I was in my 20s. I then went into the mortgage field as a manager. I went into a law firm, and that brought me into a sales director position. All of these positions have one thing in common, and that's networking. But the one thing that really turned my business around or me around was the pandemic. Okay. The pandemic, all of a sudden, if you look at all the 20 somethings or even 30 somethings, and you ask them to talk with one another without a cell phone, they'd be mumbo jumbo. It's like talking Greek to them. They forgot how to communicate. So, really, for somebody who is in their 20s or 30s, this may be total Greek for them. But in the 40s or 50s, they actually heard what I'm talking about, but they don't necessarily do it. And it's really just simple, basic stuff. But if you don't, if you don't follow up with everything, everything is for naught.
I couldn't agree more. My wife and I, we've been running our online business for the last 7 years together. Me personally since 2013. So we were already kind of pre-set up for everything that kind of happened with the pandemic. And, things were growing steadily every year, but I think there was some unexpected gasoline thrown on the fire during the pandemic, which again is still, obviously helping us to propel forward. But I think you brought up an interesting point where, there were so many people that were unprepared for,
Yes.
not just the pandemic itself, but living in this new online virtual world where handshakes couldn't be had. There was no rubbing shoulders. There was a lot of the in-person networking that was once being done was kind of all moved to online. And just to share a quick story, I got into consulting and coaching a lot of financial professionals and insurance brokerages, and my wife still does that today, because those two industries in particular were a lot of their business was predicated on, lunches and dinners and networking, and that was taken away. So I was brought in to train some of the most profitable financial firms in the US because a lot of the people that were involved weren't used to, they didn't even know how to use Zoom. They didn't even know what Zoom was. So understanding the principles of networking, not just from an in-person capacity, but how that can be converted into the online version, I think was critical. And it really it made for some amazing leaps and bounds for a lot of businesses. But I think it also raised something to the surface that there was a lot of people that did not know how to network properly because they may have been that person in the B&I room or the Latip room where they were just hanging in the back, just taking notes, not really interacting. But when you're having your one-to-one in person, it's so much different than having that one-to-one like you and I are virtually doing right now. So what do you feel for you personally before we kind of open it up to everybody else? The the things that you learned as far as how to network in person, what do you think was the biggest thing that you learned in how to do that that enabled you to kind of cross that bridge into the online networking space?
Well, the best thing, listen, the one thing that I have always based everything on is that human interaction. Okay. So when I walk up to somebody and I shake their hand and look them in the eye, okay, all of that was taken away with the pandemic. But when I shake their hand, I don't shake it like some dead fish. I shake their hand sternly and I look at them in the eye. I introduce myself. It's always Mr. or Mrs. It's that courtesy, that respect that that can't be brought out online. You've got to have that interpersonal skill. And then of course it moves to building the rapport that you must have in order to get to the next step. And if you go into a networking event or if you do one-on-one, it's the same thing, just do it a little differently, of course, but it's the same thing. You have to build that rapport. Sometimes you have 5 seconds, sometimes you have 30, sometimes a minute, sometimes 2 minutes. But you have to find that way to get onto the same level.
I could not agree more. And I think rapport, building trust and rapport is probably one of the greatest business assets that someone can have because a lot of what happens in business is aligned with the know, like, and trust that you build and that rapport that you build with your audience.
Well, funny that you should mention it like that, because there's a mantra. There's a mantra in networking. If they know you, like you, and trust you, they'll do business with you. Okay, so they can know. I know thousands of people. Okay, do they like me? Let's bring that back a little bit. Okay, but know me, like me, and trust me. That's the factor. They have to trust me, and the people who trust me, they'll do business with me. Okay, so with that in mind, you can move on to your next step.
So if someone was to ask you that, again, I think it's also interesting in networking, but in business professionals, we have the introverts and we have the extroverts. So for me, I'm an extrovert in every facet in every way, shape, and form, whether I'm one-on-one, whether I'm in a group where I know everyone, even if I don't know people, like I'm just I've always loved public speaking. I have no problem. I've been out in front of stages of thousands of people, and it's just like there's only two people in there. That comes very natural to me. The introverts, and I'm sure you can agree with this, there's a bigger learning curve, but there are more things to overcome to become a great networker because you have to have um those extrovert tendencies because whether it's leading with questions, whether it's creating that rapport or the connection between you and the other person, for some people it comes very natural. For other people, it becomes more of a challenge. So if someone was to ask you, okay, listen, Michael, I'm an introvert, what are two or three keys of how to network properly? What would you say to those people?
What I tell everybody is about the networking events. I say always go alone, go by yourself, because you don't want to share anything. Okay. However, there's a small caveat to that. If you're an introvert, you bring somebody along with you. Let's call him or them their wingman. Okay, somebody to start the conversation, somebody to invite them into the conversation, somebody to help them along, get that muster up the ability to speak. Okay, because you always say, well, when you go to a networking event, the first thing I tell everybody is to shut up, be quiet, listen, listen to the conversation. Can you be an integral part of that conversation? Well, yes, I can. So then you wait for your proper time and you inject something that you feel is worthy. Now, if you're an introvert and you have your so-called wingman, you know, they will actually do that and say, okay, Scott, what do you think about that? And have them talk about it and do that enough where they're all of a sudden they're going to break through that barrier saying, okay, I can go to a networking event on my own. I can go up to this table on my own. You know, I say this in all of my keynotes, my breakout sessions and everything. Everything is because everybody, that's always the number one question. You know, listen, I'm in sales, but I'm an introvert, not an extrovert. And I broke these barriers, but how can I get that much further? And I address that, okay? Because sales is for, well, just about everybody. If you're so much of an introvert that you can't break through, there's an inside sales position, okay? Or get out of the field, okay? Because you need to have that mentality, that outgoing, flow, you have to have it. But, to you and I, that comes natural.
Yeah, and I think all those things can be taught and learned. I mean,
Yes.
that's why there's people like you, there's people like me that teach those things. And in the very beginning, it was a struggle for me because I didn't understand how people struggled in those certain areas because it did come so natural to me because as human beings, as a from a biological standpoint, together is better. We're meant to be around other people. We're not meant to
Right.
be solitary creatures. We are meant to be, as rubbing elbows and high-fiving. And that's why, like going to a sporting event during the playoffs is one of the best things because you feed that energy. But I'm going to go back to something that you said about going to a networking event alone. I could not recommend that anymore because I remember, so there was I used to always go to some personal development conferences when I was very early on, just to kind of learn the different mindset shifts. And I remember, I went to an event with a few people that I knew. So inherently, what does everyone do? They sit down next to the people that they went with, their comfort zone. So it was really funny, and I was comfortable with this, but I mean, people were literally crawling out of their skin when the host of the event did this. So he starts the event, he comes out, gives his little spiel, and he said, before we kick off today's event, I want everyone to stand up. And there was probably like, 300 plus people in the room. And he said, I want you to look to your left and your right and raise your hand if you know at least one of those people that is next to you. And what do you think happened? Everyone's hand went up in the room. So he said, we're going to change that. And he said, I want everyone to go find someone that they don't know, and you're going to sit next to them the rest of the day. Now, the extroverts were off and running. Like they were just scattered and they're like, hey, like, let's sit.
Yep. Yep.
The introverts were literally, I mean, peeing their pants, like shaking like leaves. But it was one of those necessary things that they had to do because once everyone found someone they didn't know, he said, before we start today's event, he goes, I'm going to give you guys 3 minutes. And I want you guys to find 3 to 5 things that you have in common. And he goes, one of the best things that you can do to find this out is just ask each other some questions. So he had a big, timer on the screen and he said, go. And he then said, raise your hand when you found 3 to 5 things. Guess how long it took everyone to find 3 to 5 things they had in common?
1 minute.
1 minute. That was it. And it just goes to show that, I'm a big believer in questions lead to answers, and in sales specifically and networking specifically. The way that you find more about someone else and finding common ground is you ask. You ask, you know, tell me a little bit about what you do. Where did you go to college? How many kids do you have? Do you like to go on vacation? Where do you like to go? And those are all things that spur conversation. And that's how you create connection between two people. So I know you want to say something, so I want you to chime in.
No, I just want to say, remember the word form, FORM, family, occupation, recreation, and any message that would put you onto the same level. Okay. Just if you remember form, because when you walk into somebody's office or you go into a networking event, you talk about your children, talk about their little league, talk about major league ball, you talk about anything, find that common ground. And then all of a sudden, all those barriers fall down. Okay. You just start talking like they've been your best friend forever. And that's how it all begins.
So one of your big beliefs is that with proper networking, you'll increase your profits over time. And I'm a big believer in that. Gary Vaynerchuk says it all the time. He goes, your net worth is always in direct correlation to your network. So if you have the proper network, you can create whatever net worth that you're looking for. So break that down a little bit. Explain to people how you can create that correlation between properly networking and creating wealth and profits in one's business.
Okay. It's really very simple because after you meet them, greet them, shake their hand, eye contact, build a rapport, you're doing everything correct. How many times have you had that in a sales opportunity, left whatever you are, wherever you are, and then all of a sudden, nothing, crickets. It's like I did something wrong, but I can't figure it out. And you're going over all the steps, and no, I didn't. Well, that's only the first half of sales. The follow-up, I've done entire breakout sessions just on follow-up. Okay. And one thing that nobody does, which been doing for 15, 20 years, write a handwritten thank you note, because nothing says it better than when you're sitting at your desk and all of a sudden you get a piece of mail and it's a thank you note. And I have to tell you, about 10 or 15 years ago, I wrote a thank you note to a realtor, and she was so thankful that she sent me a thank you note for my thank you note. Okay. So, after okay, you had this great sit down. Okay, Scott, I had a great sit down with you. And I went on to before I do that. Um, One thing, when you go to a networking event, everybody is interested in handing out their business cards. Wrong. You go to a 3 hour, 4 hour networking event. My suggestion: don't hand out more than 10 business cards. That's it. Okay, because you should treat those business cards like they're money. Okay, so now if somebody asks you for your card, that means that you're doing your job properly, and you've created that. Okay, but let's say you wrote down the date, the function, and something you talked about. Your son was in Little League and or soccer, and unfortunately he broke his leg, so he can't continue on. So when I go back that night and I follow it up with an email saying, it was great to meet you on this date, such and such event. I'm sorry to hear about your son's leg. Hopefully, we can grab a cup of coffee. Now, that is just the first leg, okay? Because the following morning, you're going to write a handwritten thank you note saying almost the same thing. Put your business card in there, say, look, I hope to connect with you soon. And you mail. Then you give it about 3 days. Okay. If there is no return email from your email or the thank you note, You send out a quick little email. Hey, just following up with you. I want to grab a cup of coffee with you. And you notice I never talked about business. I never spoke business because whenever you do anything in a networking event or one on one, you go to that person, you say, look, how can I be that resource for you? How can I refer you people? How can I be your best salesperson? So again, I haven't said anything that I'm doing, that I'm selling, but I made him know that I'm willing to refer him and sell for him. And so he's going to immediately, if he's anything, he's going to say, well, what do you do? Because I would like to help you as well. And that begins. And I think that if somebody went to a networking event and then you put networking events on your calendar because you don't forget to go to them, that if you do it for a month, by that following month, you'll land more clients and that will increase your profitability the very next month.
I can attest to that I can flat out say that Nancy and I and our business would not be where it is today if it wasn't for our consistent and constant networking efforts. Nancy always says that sales and business, it's a contact sport. You got to contact people. You can't wait for the skies to open up and money and people will drop in your lap. You have to create those connections. You got to create those relationships. So, Michael, as we wind down, before I get to my final question, if someone is interested in, reading your book or finding out more about you and how you work with people, what types of clients do you serve the best? Who's your target audience? And B, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Well, my primary audience really is a company big enough where the salespeople need this type of construct. But not only the salespeople, but the support people. I'm speaking with somebody out in Ohio right now, and they have like 10 salespeople, but they have 20 support people. I
Mm.
said, I want to talk to everybody because the person speaking to that person in the lobby or answering your phones should have the same feeling, the same passion, and the more passionate you have about your clients, the more you're going to sell. Okay. So that's one thing. So, if you want to get hold of my book, it's sold on Amazon. It's sold on Amazon. Um, Networking Unleashed. It's really good. It's a really good read, and I would keep it as a guide because that will instruct you from soup to nuts exactly what you should do from the handshake all the way through the follow-up.
Mm.
You can go to my website, michaelaforman.com, michaelaforman.com. And on there, different podcasts I've been on, my leadership talk, my networking talks, and on it. But most importantly, on the bottom is a contact form. And there you just give me your information and I'll contact you by the end of the day.
Awesome. Well, all that information. So obviously you guys aren't going to have to look too far for it. It's going to be the show notes and in the email that gets broadcast about this also on the YouTube channel. You'll find it in the description there as well. So Michael, final question before we sign off today. What does success truly mean to you?
Success, I consider myself successful when I can tell everybody, teach everybody, show everybody how to be a better person.
Hmm.
If you're a better person, you're going to network, you're going to be happier. Nobody likes a disgruntled anybody. Okay. But if you walk into a networking place and you're a happy person, you're going to draw people to you. The negative, you're not. But if you're happy, going to draw it. And when I go up on stage and I'm speaking to people, I try to bring all that out in everybody. Doesn't always work, but it's a good thing.
I love that. It's your attractor factor. No one wants to be around negative people, but everybody does want to be around positive people. So, Michael, I just want to thank you again for coming on to the podcast today and sharing all your wisdom. You're a wealth of knowledge, and it really backs up a lot of what I talk about in regards to the power of networking. And I know my audience took so much away from this, and I'm going to highly encourage each and every person that listens to this to buy your book, to reach out to you. And every single person out there is every master was once a disaster. So if you're not great at networking now, you can get better, and you can take that shortcut. You can shorten the learning curve by working with people like Michael. So again, Michael, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you, Scott. It was a privilege being here, and I look forward to speaking with some of your listeners.
Absolutely. So again, everyone, to continue to support the podcast, please do subscribe on whatever listening platform you're listening to and from. If you want to send me a DM on Instagram, it's at Scott Aaron LinkedIn. Share your feedback, share the episode, but also don't hesitate to reach out to me personally, scott@scottaaron.net. We're always looking for feedback and what we can do to make this podcast the best one out there. So everyone, please enjoy the rest of your days. Love and gratitude, and I'll talk to you next time. Thank you so much for checking out today's episode. If you could, please support this podcast by hopping over to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or any place that you're listening to this. Leave us a rating and review. Let us know what you loved most and what you would like to hear more of. But also, if you would like to learn how to take your business to the next level, whether it's using LinkedIn or working directly with myself and Nancy in our intimate group coaching programs, you can head over to www.thetimetogrowth.com or scottaaron.net to learn more. Thank you again for your support, love and gratitude, and I'll talk to you soon.